from the blackest corners of your mind, they call, pulling you deep into shadow, twisting your senses, keeping you from sleep. It's time to face your darkest fears. This is Tales to Terrify. Good evening, children of the night, and welcome. 'Tis the season to immerse yourself in a cauldron full of dark and disturbing stories from strange and twisted authors. While we've got some fantastic frights to send your way this evening, I also wanted to let you know about a new anthology coming out from regular contributor to the show, Amanda Cecelia Lang, through our friends at Dark Matter Publishing. To give you a taste, here's the blurb from the website. The lights dim, the film projector whirs, and blood splatters the side of your face. Don't worry, it's just corn syrup. Probably. Welcome to Saturday Fright at the Movies, where the projector is stuck on mayhem and 13 B-movie tales are lurching off the screen. In the flickering light of this hollowed multiplex, you'll witness outrageous creature features and gritty found footage, nostalgic popcorn slashers and haunted VHS tapes, run screaming down the aisles with intergalactic zombie unicorns, tentacled rock gods, brat packs of unearthly trick-or-treaters, a goo monster with an existential crisis, and one starry-eyed coroner as he meets and greets his favorite masked maniac. Think you have the popcorn to survive the fright? Then grab your machete and your 3D glasses, because at this neon horror fest, the special effects are gory, the monsters are relentless, and the final girls have studied all the classics. This collection releases next week on the 15th, just in time to make your Halloween reading list, so make sure you check it out. Link to pre-order, which you can do right now, is in the show notes. If you'd like to hear more of Amanda, join us on Patreon for our bonus author interview series. Our editor Seth Williams spoke with Amanda a couple of weeks back, and if you're a supporter, that'll hit your feed likely sometime next month. This month, we've got a chat with another fan favorite, Frank Orito, headed your way. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. But for tonight, we've got a different pair of familiar fiends to welcome back into the fold. A couple of tales to chill your marrow, about two heads that aren't necessarily better than one, and a man who enjoys tending to his garden. Our first story for the evening comes from Arthur Davis. Arthur Davis is a management consultant who has been quoted in the New York Times and in Crane's New York Business, taught at the New School, and interviewed on New York TV News Channel 1. His work has been published in numerous journals as original and reprint fiction. He was featured in a collection, nominated for a Pushcart Prize, received the 2018 Wrightwell Award for Excellence in Short Fiction, and twice nominated, received honorable mention in the Best American Mystery Stories 2017. Additional background can be found at talesofourtime.com, the Poets and Writers Organization, and Amazon Author Central. Children of the Night, join me for Arthur Davis's The Head Within, a Tales to Terrify original.
I woke with two heads. It's happened before, though long ago. I sat at the edge of my bed, a sad affair of sticks and wooden branches held together by whatever was handy. My hut is small, and a distance from any village, and a lifetime away from a place called London. I heard that many of my ancestors died from a terrible disease when it struck that city. I am alone, as I have been for most of my life. Few pass this far away from the nearest village. The forest where I live has a reputation for not having a soul. Towns, villages, they have souls. People have souls. I know that. I don't believe that a forest, a place that can be dark and beautiful at the same time, can be soulless. I live in this small space every day, determined to hold on to the scraps of life. The last time I had two heads, days passed before it sank back into my body and left me as one in terrible pain. I am not young, I am not old, and the promise of death is a shadow that follows me, that follows all of us. I pulled out a dead worm and drank the rainwater I collected in a bowl. The bones of the rabbit I caught yesterday littered the dirt floor of my hut. It was cold, and I was shivering. The animal skins that once protected me from the frigid winds and biting darkness were clinging shreds of their past. Like most days, this day I was consumed by the injustice of the life I had been given. I craved revenge because I was forced to carry this curse out of no fault of my own. I had to rebuild part of the walls and seal the top of my hut with more dried mud. I had to get myself warm. Yesterday I went out to hunt and spotted a pair of villagers in the distance. I held my position behind a rocky outcropping until they moved off. They had bows and arrows and were hunting too. They had venison skins cloaked around them. That would keep any man warm. I'm as tall and broad as any man I've seen these last years. Someday those fine skins would be mine, and those men would die face down in the frost of the dirt on which they tread. I have two heads, I said, and tried to shake off my fright and the biting hunger in my center that never went away. These lands were filled with stories and tales of strange creatures of which I am one. There is no place for a soul with two heads. A slice of yellow from the sky slipped through the top of my hut and rained down on my face. It warmed me as I stood, thirsting for more. More yellow, more warmth, and maybe the glow would scare off the head. I didn't know where they went when they sank back into my body, and maybe that was best. I was a fright as it was. I didn't want to know how I came to be such a fearful sight. I didn't think of myself as a bad person, or maybe even a bad creature, for it was difficult to compare me to any other man. Even in the reflection of my face, in the water of a quiet stream, I was different. Not evil, I wanted to believe, though in this part of the forest maybe I wasn't the only one who had two heads. Was that even a possibility? What if I had kin out there and we were family? I can't turn my head to clearly see the twin to my left, and my twin never sees me. "Can you hear me?" I said, barely in a whisper, uncertain if I wanted an answer. The last time and before that, there were no words. The heads did not speak, and neither did I. I can't recall details, but it wasn't long before each receded back into the bloody opening in my neck, as though they had found the wrong home for themselves and had to continue their search. This time was different. Everything I was feeling was different. There was movement within, and it wasn't mine. "Who are you? Why are you in my body?" it answered. The voice was loud, threatening. I had never spoken that way. I didn't think it was possible to speak that way. My body shook violently. My arms rose. My fingers stretched and clawed the air, searching. "You must go. I will not have it," it said. "You are in my land and in my body," I seethed. This time, my insides were wrong. Unpredictable movement that wasn't mine. I was quickly possessed of outrage. I am a violent creature by nature. I have never doubted myself, and the ease with which I turn brutal. My body swelled. I was being pushed, and I was pushing back. This wasn't the head of long ago. This was a different kind of possession. My left leg gave way. I fell against the wall of my hut and struggled to right myself. My left hand turned and rose against me and clawed the air, searching for my throat. It came with long, powerful fingers, thrashing for prey. It was almost upon me, and as quickly was met with an equal force as my right hand rose in my defense. My right hand clutched my left wrist and twisted it violently. An anguished howl sprang from the lips of my tormentor. I held back the left hand and subdued it. "I will break it off if you don't leave," I said in a voice of anger and frustration, now a welcome kin from the depths of whoever I had become in order to survive. There was a garbled response. As close as it was, I couldn't make it out. My anger and outrage shook me, deafened me to all else except my survival. I found myself a creature of power without thought. I twisted my left wrist until I heard the bones snap. The creature inhabiting my body gave out a terrible cry, trying to free itself of my grasp. I released his broken left hand and went for his throat as he had come from mine. There was no way to defend himself. He twisted and turned away from my right hand. It had come for him, and it would not be denied. His head scraped violently against mine, trying to push me away. But I had found a strength within that I had to believe was mine from birth. It took the evil this creature was trying to impose upon me that allowed me to discover who I already was. My fingers, part of my right hand that I had never known or understood, had a life of their own and a mission, rendering me a spectator. My hand fisted and slammed into his throat, shaking my body. My hand opened, fingers stretched long until they wrapped around his throat and quickly exerted such a force that my body trembled out of control. We dropped to our knees. My hand clenched tighter and tighter as his broken left hand flailed mindlessly, trying to fend it off. I held and squeezed and fumed and spoke words I never heard and tightened long after his head slumped down, dead. "There," I said, angered and empowered as I had never been before my world turned dark and uncertain. I woke in a shaking chill sometime later. The battle had left the whole of my body in wrenching pain. I worked to get to my feet and steady myself. The left side of my face was smeared red. What little order there was of my hut was scattered and broken. I was exhausted, spent, and trying to recognize myself and what I had done. My left shoulder was twisted, unrecognizable, as was the meager comfort of what remained of my world. The rest of the day was a blur of foreign images. By the time the yellow from the sky returned, I knew that I would not be threatened again. I had killed the soul of the beast within and had become a greater beast myself. I was less a man and more of the forest. My right arm and hand were measurably larger than my left. It was the arm and hand of a hunter, a warrior, a killer. Everything was different and the same. Why had I taken so long to fight for my own life, to rid myself of the curse? The anguish would end, as would my living in a world of uncertainty. I found myself, a soul with purpose. "I'm alive," I said breathlessly, finally turning back to see the remains of my dead self. Splattered dry with my blood, its right eye twitched, then again. I stepped away, startled in shock, and heaved a fear that I had not rid myself of the beast. It was alive. There was no killing the monster. It would regain life, and once again I would be both slave and host to its horror. The twitch quickened and wrenched the eye open, frantically searching, then blinked and blinked and blinked and slowly faded. "Die!" I screamed over and over, launching the heel of my foot into the remains of me, cursing, fevered with a lifetime of fear and rage until the splatter of its existence covered much of the dirt of my shattered hovel. I stumbled, caught my breath, and stepped from my hut for the first time, alone. I lifted my gaze to the sky and screamed. A rageful howl echoed loud through the forest. I continued until my voice gave out as my anger exploded into a fearful determination. The air smelled rich, fervent. The sky blossomed a deep, embracing blue as never before. I was free of my dark world. My devil was dead. The world had cursed me. They made me an outcast. Now, free of my tormentor, retribution would be swift. I had a world to explore and was determined to venture fearless. The hunters I avoided for so long were out there. Jealous of their freedom and my crushing lifetime of confinement, they would be the first of my prey. Then others, unaware of who I am and the reality of what I am, and the lifetime of grievances I have to exorcise from my spirit. One good arm was all I would need to survive and find warmth in the many cloaks of stolen venison skins. This was always the me that was hidden. Rageful, I always was and remain the one-headed monster.
That was Arthur Davis's The Head Within, as read by Brian Rollins. Brian Rollins is a voice actor residing in Denver, Colorado. He's voiced over a dozen audiobooks, including the popular Glenn and Tyler series. Horror fans will want to check out his narration of Ancient Enemies by Brian McKinley, a vampire political thriller. You can visit Brian at his website, thevoicesinmyhead.com, or on Twitter at VoicesOfBrian. Thank you, Brian. Our second tale tonight comes from Akis Linardos. In a cove of a Greek island, Akis was born a rather peculiar infant and has only grown stranger every year. By day, he's a researcher of biomedical AI and ethics, hoping there's something less dystopian to come from this technology. His short tales have wormed their way into Apex Magazine, Gamut, Apparition Lit, Heartline Spec, among others. Visit his website for updates on his dreadful machinations. Listen with me, children of the night, to Akis Linardos's Blooms from Your Stomach, a Tales to Terrify original.
When I first found Ira, she was an emaciated, needful thing. A shivering kitty licking brain fragments off the pavement. Rain awakened a wet scent of goat shit from the hills, and the almost ceremonial parade of cars had thinned now that the undertakers took the body away. Slippery roads never deterred the arrogance of Cretan drivers. Not that the unfortunate man who'd been jogging along the avenue connecting Iraklio to my cottage would have known. A tourist that got too distracted by the suburbs. I'd been able to tell by his long socks, even though his head had been squashed like a watermelon. They'd tried to obscure the body from the passing traffic, but I'd seen a loose spinal cord poking through meat. I had chopped enough limbs to know every crevice of a mangled body. Any way the corporeal form can twist and bones bloom from muscle like bamboo shoots. We all have our own parasites, little brain worms of innocent curiosity that, with enough feed, turn grotesque. Fascination with graphic death started as my own way to cope with the night terrors after your death. Visions of your skin melting to form liquid threads that tangled around my legs. Your eyeballs popping out, multiplying. A mass of stares judging me for failing to do what was necessary to save you. I lingered too long on the scene, unable to control the morbid smile on my face, earning me disgusted side glances from the policemen. But they didn't bother with me, just packed the body and left. No one bothered to bother in general in this town. Not policemen, not lawyers, and not the damn doctors when lives were at stake. I'd grown sick of it. If you had been there, you'd have told me they try their best, and I'd have told you it's not good enough. But it doesn't matter. You weren't there. Though what's worse, you weren't not there either. Your absence had been more powerful than a presence, and when the kitty rubbed against my leg seeking refuge under my umbrella, I thought I saw a glimpse of you in her beady eyes. Perhaps it's why I gently grabbed her by the belly and lifted her. It's as you always said. You don't adopt cats, they adopt you. How long had it been since our old cat Riri died? After 2 steps, I'd already decided I'd name her after you. As I carried her to the car, she kept licking blood from her muzzle, and even reached out with her front paws for the crimson puddle, mewling like I was depriving her of the most succulent of treats. Back in the cottage, once I placed her by the hearth, Ira took 2 hesitant steps, then rushed into a crevice beneath the half-broken sofa. The litter box was still upstairs in our storage room beside a pack of moldy cat food and Dr. Costa's freshly severed head. Don't judge me. He's the one that failed you, the one that killed you first. In some cases, being incapable is as good as murder. You only felt the pain until it ended you, but I still live with its memory. I decided to see beauty in morbid situations so their haunting will not hurt as much. Or, faithful to what you once said, hauntings take the color of our emotions. And mine shifted from the blackness of dread and fear to the green of rebirth, to the gold of vengeance. Anyway, I figured it was not a good idea to feed the kitty mold, so I instead finger-pecked some meat from the oven, and hoped the oregano smell wouldn't bother her as I spread it by her hideout. I didn't have sand for her, though, so I scooped some dirt from outside, at least for the night. Shovel was still there from the last pit I dug. My garden was big enough for comfort and for storing the sizable quantities of meat I gathered, but I knew where to dig to avoid hitting a rigor mortis muscle. When I got back and laid the dirt-filled litter by the hearth, the meat bits were gone and the kitty was licking a smattering of dried blood under the couch. So dried it was impossible for her tiny tongue to dislodge the droplets from the floor tile. As she squeezed her head deeper into the crevice, her back arched, and from beneath her tail poked out a thread-thin worm inspecting the air with a curiosity of its own. Remember when Riri had parasites? I might be well off now, but we struggled for money then. Which didn't stop you from adopting kittens on the verge of death. You'd always buy a single anti-parasitic pill, ignoring the vet insisting on 3. He couldn't know your body was special, that your stomach multiplied anything you swallowed and vomited back out the excess, keeping only essential nutrients. Cat food would also last us for months. If only your uncle was better at thinking critically. He'd have figured out what a tapeworm would do to you. It was simple math. But doctors are shit at math. Gently, I propped up the kitty's tail and tried to grab the worm, but it slid back inside her like a snail retreating to its shell. Vet gave me the expected care package of anti-parasitic pills and vaccination shots. Ira slept through the day in the bundle of clothes she grew to like, while I worked on a Dutch CrossFit gym's website code. When my imagination began wandering to dislocated limbs twirling over horizontal bars and bench press weights dropping onto the very sensitive areas of neck and jaw, I knew it was time for a break. My fascination with the grotesque was not something I'd want subliminally infusing the design. Dutch people paid well, and I was hoping for loyal customers to support my escapades. Gibbous moon peeked from the window. I went upstairs, spread the tarpaulin on the justice room, and began sawing the meat I'd gathered a week ago from the local hospital. It had to be done now or it would spoil. Bone was tougher than usual, making the saw grind and my shoulder ache. Doctors must drink plenty of milk. I could almost smell the calcium. My eyes stung with sweat and tears. Knowing the name of these people made it worse, but what pained me most was thinking how harshly you'd judge my actions, my thoughts. If you'd shed all your love for me, gushing out disappointment, failing to see it's all meant to be a gift. The garden had to be fed to nourish your soul anew, and these were the people who failed you, failed us. I wrapped the diced meat in crinkly tarpaulin, tight enough to waste no blood, then carried it downstairs, out to the humid, quiet dawn. The neighbor was out early on his morning routine, pacing in circles around his house, his hawkish nose almost touching his phone screen. The guy always reminded me of a horse with a carrot on a stick. He waved at me, barely glancing up as I spread the tarpaulin on the dirt, and I waved back. It had been 5 years since I last recalled his name. I went about my business as if I was alone, shoveling dirt away to make new nests. Turns out, if you did something with enough nonchalance, everyone was willing to believe you were doing something not worth noting. It was probably how so many crappy doctors still leached money from the naive. Pretense made the world go round. As I planted the third chunk of meat, I noticed something protruding from the dirt, feeling the air like a bulky antenna. A parasite poking out of the earth's own rectum like Ira's worm? But it was jointed, like an arthropod. It was a human finger, a pinky. It was not an appealing finger by any means, caked with dirt like a plucked carrot, the nail yellow and choked in mud. And from the 2 joints that made it out, the base one was green, still unripe. A smile spread across my face, for you see, I'd finally done it. I had fed the garden so much it was now sated, and was vomiting back the extras, cradling the meat like seeds, defeating death with old life sprout anew. We'd be together again. I eyed sideways at the neighbor's lawn. Still glued to his phone, he was walking back and forth, an oblivious human pendulum. Nightmares seized me that night. Dreams of walking in circles like that neighbor, but around an operating table upon which lay a faceless woman. Worms leaked like sweat from her skin, and in the fog of my dream stupor, I knew with certainty that I could save her, if only I managed to reach her. But an invisible force stopped me, and I circled around and around, merry-go-round like trying to find an opening. The force was not invisible. It was a blurry barrier, and it was tangible human forms. Surgeons with outstretched arms, barring me from pushing further. Their gloved hands sticking to my skin. There was a wet, slick feeling on my cheeks and in my hair like the gloves were spreading their membranous plastic to engulf me. The hum of a machine shook the floor. The worms became green and corrugated, larvae feeding on the woman's flesh. When I awoke, it was with a scream and a body spasm that knocked something heavy from my ribs. It was Ira, shambling by the bed. She had been licking me, and in my hallucinations, I had snapped and hurled her away. To my surprise, she didn't seem wary of me after that. I never thought a cat could forgive a violent act so fast, or even understand that it was unintended. She mewed a little, but after I took her to the bed and nestled my cheek upon her rough fur, she quieted. I didn't feel like I deserved such a good cat. I didn't deserve much of anything, but at least I had Ira, and she soon began purring, lulling me back into a peaceful slumber. I started letting Ira out 2 months later, around the same time the pinky fingers had bloomed to full hands, their flower palms facing the sun. The fingers wavered slightly in the breeze, but reacted more strongly to Ira jumping at them, undulating or struggling to twist in place as if they wanted to pet her. Soon the first batch of reborn will come. Soon I'll know if this works and shove more meat into the earth until the earth gives me you. I'd nurtured the bush surrounding the garden, fed it with all the microbes to grow thick and obscure the interior, but the fingers grew faster anyway. I should have been more worried about being witnessed. But I figured maybe the bush was the wrong choice here. A man's insecure attempt to hide what society implied was not appropriate because it was unusual. Chaos didn't care to hide. Chaos was nature's pride. I slept in the wet mud that night, my head nesting on a palm, 3 hands surrounding my legs, and Ira tucked in my embrace like a teddy bear. The comfort I felt was familiar, in a way, like I was in your embrace again. I thought I'd forgotten what good sleep felt like. When I awoke at the crack of dawn, it was like I'd been reborn, a child observing sunlight for the first time. Ira purred in my embrace still, and my own stinking saliva had spilled down to the palm I nestled on. Even the cool breeze was refreshing. But soon I glanced at the neighboring house. The bushes were not high enough to obscure the vantage point of the pendulum neighbor who was now staring, the cell phone drooping from his hand like a withered petal. He met my eyes and lifted his phone, walking a pace much faster than the one he'd made a habit of. Order is an infantile attempt to cloud fear with control. Order is a perverted fantasy of man. But it's a fantasy people get addicted to. The sight of chaos cannot be trusted with them. Sooner or later, what's-his-name was always going to realize there was something off. And it was a shame. I did not want to hurt this guy. Ira sat on her rear legs, wagging her tail and silently watching the gagged, moaning neighbor. We were in the harvest room. Remember how I'd once lost a meeple from Carcassonne there, and you shrugged and swallowed another in secret? You hadn't shown me your powers yet, but I knew. I'd seen you. But I waited for when you'd be ready to tell me more about it yourself. Ira craned her head every time I passed by as I moved around readying my harvest tools, begging for my touch. A hungry thing in so many ways. I wondered if she sensed my agitation, my frustration at myself, the way my hand shook, unable to keep the knife steady. I'd only dragged doctors to the harvest room before, scumbags that took bribes to push certain patients up their priority. He didn't seem like a bad guy. Everyone was dirty in some way, though. More than once I'd heard him yelling at his mother on the phone in past years. That was no way to treat your mother. But was it enough to join the garden? I leaned over him and he flinched. With one index finger over my lips, I said, "I will remove the gag and you will not scream. It's unbecoming of a grown man to scream, and I will not appreciate it." I undid the straps and the ball dropped from his mouth, spittle clinging to it with the stench of teeth that have not been brushed in a while. He worked his jaw for a moment before he started begging. Too indignant. Some generics I heard before coded with way too many pleases and "you don't have to's." Only this one didn't use the "it wasn't my fault." "Your mother hasn't visited in a while," I said. He fell silent at the sound of the word mother. His Adam's apple bobbed. Cancer. At least he got to have a mother. It was only when I met you that I stopped blaming myself, as my father did, for killing my own mother. But blame lies with the adults, especially those who fail to stand up to their responsibility. "Got her a good doctor?" We went to the public hospital. They made us wait in line forever." "Bastards wanted an envelope, huh?" He nodded and swallowed hard. Free healthcare was an ideal we liked to believe in, but greed always found a way. "We're not rich, but we gave what money we could. Wasn't enough to save her. We'd waited too long already." "Should have used that money to take her somewhere else." He nodded. Ira had reached his side now and was slicking the tears from his cheeks. Maybe she tried to calm him. Or maybe she thought the triangle of moles on the man's left cheek were something she could dislodge and devour with enough licking. "Can you undo the straps?" he asked. "I won't say anything about anything. It's not my business. You don't have to." "We are the same kind of idiot," I said. "We had other options, but we trusted the first fool we came across with the most important thing. Though in my case, that fool was family, on my wife's side. An uncle that turned out too incompetent to save his own life." He opened his mouth, wavered on the brink of saying something, then shut it again. He was a cornered man, careful not to agitate something feral. Ira had begun licking her own butt, the same place that worm had poked out some days ago, now devoid of the parasite. If only doctors were as diligent as vets. Doctor had diagnosed my wife with a tapeworm. It was an aberrant worm, one that moved to her stomach, perhaps attracted by her unusual chemistry, I continued, spilling the words I'd told no one. Even the bit about your stomach, and how you required personalized treatment. How your system haywired multiplying tapeworms that ate up your nutrients, causing your stomach to multiply them more aggressively in a destructive loop. How the doctor failed you. He was her own uncle, and yet he didn't give her a second look. "I'm sorry," the confusion evident in his tone. "I buried her in the garden. Her family complained about tradition, but I was way past caring. That was her last wish, too. No place like home." I paused. "No place like the garden, Ira. And you became the garden. Its flowers bloom from your stomach. She will bloom like everything else. If I feed it enough, it will eventually sprout her in excess." He swallowed. "All right, look," he said, growing bold at his own words. "Me and you, we have both been cheated by the system. I followed along a path of least resistance instead of thinking my mother deserved better. Could have spent that money and gone to Athens, get her better treatment. I learned that now. I won't bring her back, but man, I'm with you on taking down these doctors. They had it coming." "You remind me of myself," I said. "A lot." He smiled as tears began overflowing again in palpable relief at our semblance of camaraderie. "What's your name?" I asked. "Konstantinos." I nodded, laid a hand on his shoulder, and shoved the gag back into his mouth, watching his elation disperse before his dread. My hand was finally steady around the blade. Ira, fully grown, leaps in play around the bulge in the garden, the cocoon cracked by flower hands and mouths, whose mossy tongues reach for the sunlight. She nuzzles by the cheek with the triangle moles, sprouting lotus-like with green lips around the teeth. The nostrils of his hawkish nose chock full of dirt. I often have to chase Ira when she gets carried away and bites off an incisor from the neighbor's mouth. She has a certain affinity to this man, even after the garden has spat back 3 of his clones. Doctors poke among the weeds too, pale as their lab frocks at the nose, but green around the temples. But more importantly than all the growing bodies, though, I see you. The garden pulsates with your beating heart. The bushes whisper the song you sang to me when I struggled with insomnia. And the sprouting hands caress the kitty with all the tenderness you once caressed Riri. It's not magic, but some bizarre niche phenomenon of chaos, like you were. Your essence seeped into the earth, and now the earth is as generous as you. And I know, one day, your own body wrapped around the same soul will sprout as well. Maybe finger first or teeth first, maybe palms up or elbow thrust. You will come back to me once the garden reaches excess.
That was Akis Linardos' Blooms from Your Stomach, as read by Curtis Michael Holland. Curtis is a gay Greek Black Indigenous Canadian-born expat. He teaches and directs theater and voice acts from his home studio and local studios in his home, Hong Kong. He's an all-or-nothing kind of guy. You can either find him surrounded by a million of his closest friends, or melting away in a sauna reading a scary book. Thank you, Curtis. Well, children of the night, the hour is late, and we've run out of tales to tell. For now. Tales to Terrify is made possible by the tremendous generosity of our supporters on Patreon and PayPal. Incredible fans like Lestle Baxter, Amanda Carrillo, Amanda Gottfried, and Orion D. Hegre, whose generous support keeps these lights on and flickering ominously. If you're not a supporter, head over to patreon.com/Tales to Terrify. You'll find all kinds of perks, like ad-free episodes, bonus content, and one-of-a-kind collectibles. Every dollar goes back into this show, and we appreciate your support so much. Want another way to support the show that doesn't cost you a cent? Head over to Podchaser, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and drop us a 5-star review. You'll not only put an unnaturally wide smile on our faces, but help new listeners discover our terrifying tales too. You can show your love of the show out in the world with some Tales to Terrify merch. TalesToTerrify.com/merch will take you to our TeePublic store, where we've got a great collection of creepy custom and curated designs. Tales to Terrify is produced by Seth Williams, Meredith Morgenstern, Andrew Gibson, Crystal Hammond, Spencer Disparty, and myself, Drew Sebastini, with original theme by Nebulous Entertainment. Tales to Terrify is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Join us again next week as we embrace the old ways of more Tales to Terrify.